Can I push back on that?
If you're a Palestinian, you should never agree to anything with Israel because Israel is genocidal. Israel is an apartheid state. So I feel like both sides have this like incentive to just fight forever.
Governments and the leaders of the Arab countries are essentially puppets set up by the West.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
People are literally killing Jews and willing to die to kill Jews, right?
We cannot go to a two-state solution.
Man, if Hamas would have released all the hostages a year in, personally, I think domestic support in Israel for the war in Gaza would have been much harder to sustain. That I would say that right now on its current path, I think Israel is on a path to its own destruction.
Before starting the show, it's very important for me to emphasize that if you did not subscribe, please subscribe. It helps us a lot. First of all, to maintain this show. Second of all, to bring a lot of more better, bigger creators or commentators or just in general bigger talents that can have discussions with us. I believe that's important. I believe from the Israeli side it's important to have conversations with people abroad, so it will help us a lot to subscribe. So if you can, I would greatly appreciate it. Enjoy the show. Steven, thank you for coming to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Well, today we have Doran Shafrir, which is one of the biggest educational podcasts, or rather channels in Israel.
I guess you could say the Hebrew speaking.
The Hebrew speaking, yeah. And Steven is like the OG, like political commentator on the internet. So it's like a huge honor for you to be here. And we're first going to start like with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's start with the overall idea on the conflict itself. Like if you can give like a couple of minutes, what do you think about the conflict itself, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And then we'll talk about the overall war that was for the past 2 years.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. My the most zoomed out perspective I have is that I think from the beginning of the Israeli-Arab conflict, what would become the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I'm sympathetic to both sides. I'm sympathetic to the kind of the start of the creation of Israel, the first waves of Jews that came to the Levant in the late 1800s. But I'm also sympathetic towards the people that lived here and, their feelings that other people were coming, and then the kind of conflict that would arise as a result of that, trying to split the land. But then as time has gone on, I feel like we've kind of hit this weird stalemate where both sides feel a little bit intractable, or like they have things that they won't give up that they kind of need to in order to make some peaceful arrangement. And everybody kind of seems like they can kick the can down the road on this and never figure out an actual solution to the problem. And one day it'll magically be solved. And I guess going in, it seems like there's this pattern that plays out of there's a resolution, but it doesn't really come to fruition and nothing actually gets solved. And then eventually this boils over into some huge conflict. And then I would say that's kind of what happened in the year 2000, with the failure, you could say, of like Oslo 1 and 2, nothing really happened. People started to get, unhappy about it. And then in 2000, you get the Second Intifada. I would say with the Abraham Accords, it felt like another effort to kind of like, we'll figure the Palestinian thing out later. And then eventually, you're like the border riots, and you get like October 7th. And it's like, okay, well, and then, yeah, I feel like that's kind of like, that feels like the pattern that I would say Israel-Palestine is kind of trapped in. And it doesn't seem like they're going to break, or you guys are going to break from that anytime soon. It's my perception. It's a very broad take.
Yeah, I understand. We're starting broad so we can go narrow then. Doran, I would like to hear your perspective on the matter, on the conflict itself.
Well, speaking as an Israeli to a primarily Israeli audience, I don't know if I would differ that much from what is the classical narrative, which you must know quite well by now, Steven. I would like to say that I'm not a political person. I'm not a political streamer, unlike you. I'm not really interested in putting on a show or having like this huge win in a debate. I'm more interested in a debate in the, in the literal sense of the word, in which maybe I could change your mind about some key issues, or maybe you could change my mind or make my understanding of things better. I'm glad that we're having this talk. Now, what is my, how do I assess the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I think what you've said is quite accurate, but also I think there are some problems with it. I think we'll delve more into how I see things the more specific we get as Moshe interrogates us. Let's put it like that.
But let's put it in general perspective. Like, what do you point that is generally right with what Destiny said, or rather Stephen, and what you're not agreeing with this assessment?
So his assessment is quite correct that there's this stalemate and that there's no real foreseeable way for a solution. However, I think that Stephen sees the whole thing about going around the Palestinians with the Abraham Accords. I think he views it, well, I wouldn't say in a negative light, but I think he sees it as one of the main contributors to October 7th, and he can correct me if I'm representing him wrong. But I think that's not a correct... I don't think that's the correct view, and maybe we could discuss a little bit of that.
Stephen, if you can answer what he said.
No, I think it's fair. And I would say I do put it in a pretty negative view. Like, I feel that way, so yeah.
I understand. So let's start with the narrow question about this discussion, yeah? Is it a religious conflict, or is it a conflict about land? And let's start with Doran, because he spoke last.
So here's the thing, it's kind of both by definition, because even if you were to say that it's a religious conflict, then you would have to say that it's a religious conflict about land, right? And if you were to say that it's a purely realpolitik conflict, then you would also have to say that it's about land. So either way, it's about land. The only question is, does religion play a significant part in it or not? I would have to say that it does, for several reasons. Indeed, the first Zionists were secular, as Destiny, of course, knows. But if we were to think about what led these early Zionists to, well, Zion, right, to Israel, Palestine, as it was called under the mandate, then you would have to come up with religious reasons. In addition, the main push behind the great powers that backed the early Zionists, for example, the early British or even certain movements in America, they were, many of them, Christian Zionists, right? If we think about Arthur Balfour, or even, the prime minister at the time, what was his name?
Chamberlain?
No, never mind. But the prime minister of when the Balfour Declaration was issued, he was also a religious Zionist from an evangelical perspective. And from the Arab side, we have to think about, the whole movement with Haj Amin al-Husseini and all of these superstars that, of course, viewed the conflict in terms of religion. So I think we would have to conclude that it's very religiously based.
Stephen.
Yeah, everybody hates me on this, even my own audience. I feel like the religious part is an incredibly minor part. I don't think it is that relevant. I think that anytime you have two groups of people and they're going to fight over especially land, any difference is going to come out. If there was a group of people who only played PlayStation and a group of people who only played Xbox, and the PlayStation people tried to go live where the Xbox people were, they would start fighting. And at some point, they would bring up the fact that their console is better than the other console. I think that for Arabs and Jewish people, for Muslims and Jewish people, it's the undertones are a lot more expressed, that's for sure. And I definitely think that there are aspects of it that at times it seems more religious. After 67, I think that people felt a lot more religiously driven, having the opportunity to live in the West Bank again, or the historic lands of Judea and Samaria. I think that in the year 2000 onwards, like Hamas definitely takes like a more kind of extremist bend. But I feel like it's kind of funny because I look at especially the Arab side, and I feel like this concept of Arab unity or this concept of global jihad, it's a thing that they talk about, and then it's a thing that people in the West like to point at, but it's always been kind of an illusion. Ever since the fall of the Ottoman Empire, I feel like there's always been this kind of illusion that all of the Arab states or all of the Muslim states are united in this fight, but not really. Like, they're human and they can be extricated from this conflict in a way where, Western leaders are appeasing them, whether we're talking about Sadat in Egypt and a whole bunch of money from the US, in 79 to make peace with Israel, whether we're talking about the fact that a lot of these, your Hashemite family and, in Jordan or a lot of your Gulf states, a lot of these monarchies are here because, the West favors them and backs them and kind of has them there. I feel like there's so much going on politically and so much going on with land that like it would be stupid to say there's not some kind of religious undertones, especially with some of the rhetoric, with some of the killings, with some of the ways that people talk about it and view it. But I think it's largely stems from this kind of like land conflict is how I feel. I would say, and then my biggest justification for that was I'd say if it was as religious as some people want it to be, and I'm not saying you are saying it's super religious, but some people are like, oh, it's definitely a holy war. I think if it was, I think you'd be seeing way more participation from surrounding Muslim states, surrounding Arab states, and you don't really see that participation that much. I feel like, especially now, over the past 30 years or whatever, generally most of them just want to kind of like move on and build their economy and work with the U.S. and blow up Iran and stuff, and they don't want to. They don't want to be involved in this conflict as much. That's my feeling, at least.
Can I push back on that? I think that
whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay, so I think a lot of what you said is correct, but I think you're not giving enough credit for the religious background, and I would like to cite some examples of how I think it's more religious than you make it seem. So you spoke about ever since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Let's add some context to our viewers and listeners here. The Ottoman Empire was essentially the last caliphate when Ataturk, like the great modernizer of Turkey, abolished the caliphate. It was like this huge disaster for the Islamist world, shall we say, in a sense, who believed that there should still be a caliphate, and it was viewed, the whole thing with the defeat of the Ottoman Empire and its gradual decline over the maybe centuries before that, that was seen as a huge tragedy by the Muslim world. At that time, there was this very well-known and popular line of thinkers active in Egypt at the time, which was, of course, an important center for Islamic thought. Two of these famous lines of thinkers would be Sayyid Qutb and Hassan al-Banna. These two people are well known for popularizing the Muslim Brotherhood, but also you could say, if you really think about the ideas, you could say that Salafi jihad, Salafi Islam also came from these two. Before them, there were two more important thinkers. One of them was Al-Afghani, and another, I forgot his name, but these guys, maybe Badr, something Badr, and this guy had the most widely spread and read newspaper in the entirety of the Muslim world. So he was basically the one who sets the tone, right, in the Arab world, which was newly becoming partitioned into states, right? And because up until then it was the Ottomans, and then it was this dream of Arab unity under the Hussein McMahon letters, and then it became nationalized, right? You would say, at least the elites would try to keep it nationalized. The common folks maybe don't like it so much, but anyway. These guys, that line that led to the Muslim Brotherhood and to Salafi Jihad, when they spoke about the Jews in Palestine, they would refer to them as a humiliation to the Islamic Ummah. And we're talking like way before Israel was established, right? In the first waves of Zionism, that the weakest people on earth, the Jews, they come into this land and, they're buying lands from the Arabs who are selling it to them. And this presence of Jews in that land, I guess you've heard the expression Bait Dar al-Islam, right? In the land of the Muslims, shall we say. Okay. This presence of these Jews there and this gradual takeover is a humiliation for the entire Ummah. And these people were the most widely read people in the Arab world. They were like the biggest streamers, let's say, by far. And these are the people who laid the groundworks for how the Zionists are viewed in the Arab and Muslim world. And they were using explicitly religious language, and they were explicitly religious thinkers. And of course, the final nail in the coffin of proving that they are religious thinkers is that these are the spiritual fathers of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafi Islam.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how much we might get into heavy disagreement here. So one of the things that when I'm kind of like analyzing the history of really anything, I feel like there's kind of like of two minds or of two worlds you can be in. So in one world, we understand this in a modern sense, but I feel like some people don't give it any credit in the historical sense. People say a lot of stuff for a lot of reasons. Like if like if I were like giving a fair, what I would say is a fair take on, for instance, the 67 war. People will be of two minds of this, saying that Israel started it, they preemptively struck for no reason, and then on the other end, people say, well, Israel started it because, Egypt gave every intention that they were about to start war again. They, repeated some of the same actions that led to the, prior conflict a decade earlier, blocking off the Straits of Tiran. When I look at it and I look at everything that's going on, when I look at, Nasser's statements to the Arab trade unionists, everything else, and, all of the crazy things he was saying, it looks to me and it feels to me like these are things that he has to say to keep the Arab street happy while also trying not to go to war because he knows he's going to lose.
Like a politician would?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you say one thing to appease your people, and then you posture, especially with the rest of the Arab world making fun of you. But in reality, Nasser cast out all of the UN peacekeeping forces throughout the entire Sinai that had been put there after the Suez crisis before. But like his army was exhausted from tens of thousands of soldiers had been committed to Yemen. Absolutely nothing had gotten accomplished there, and still nothing has been accomplished there. And he just wasn't in a position to fight at all. But like from the Israeli side, like I could see, well, of course, this guy is saying crazy shit. It sounds like he's, everybody's about to take us out, and we have no friends, really. And so I understand from both sides. But when I look at the actions, when I look at like what's actually going on, I feel like the people can say one thing, but it doesn't feel like that thing is actually there as much as they might want it to be, or they're almost trying to speak it into existence, or they're trying to posture. So going back to, what any Islamic spiritual leader might say, out of Cairo, they might say a thing about Islamic unity. But when I look at this, two things come to mind. One, I think if it would have been Christians or anybody else moving to the mandatory area of Palestine, the Levant, whatever you want to call it, anybody moving there, if it would have been Christians, they would have had a different rhetoric for it. If it would have been other Arabs from Europe, I think they would have had a word for it. I think that what the feeling is that, okay, well, the Ottoman Empire is gone. We Arabs can finally make our own caliphate again without these, fucking Turks ruling over us. And now, okay, Iraq, they got a country, and these guys over here, Jordan and the Hashemites, they got a country, and Egypt, they're cool, they get their own thing. And what the fuck? Why are all these people coming into our area in Palestine? Why don't we have a country? And I feel like that thought is the thing that drives them to whatever the rhetoric is to push out, the people that are coming in. I know this is triggering to Jewish people because I understand that the majority of people there now are not European transplants, and the majority came from the Middle East, especially after the diaspora and everything else. But just saying at that particular point in time, I can understand that feeling from the Arabs. And then final point, the feeling that I have is that if the religious drive was as strong as they wanted it to be, or as strong as they said it would be, I kind of look at the behavior of what happens in 47 and 48. And I feel like if there was this true Arab unity, or this true global jihad ideological commitment to driving out the Jews, I think they would have been able to do it. But I feel like every nation at the time was more finagling for their own interests. Egypt had an opportunity to capture as much of the Gaza Strip as they could. They put a fake Palestinian government in there and recall it in a year, gone. And then Jordan had the opportunity to take over the West Bank if they could, and they did. They didn't really push much further. They probably could have. And then everybody kind of like took something for themselves, and then they kind of fuck off. And I feel like when I look at this behavior, I'm like, this doesn't seem like a unified group of religious people ready to, excise the scourge of the Jew in their land. It kind of looks like a bunch of nation states that are just finagling for land, but they're using the religious rhetoric to gather people to fight as much as the nation is interested in. That's the feeling I get. Otherwise, I have a hard time explaining the actions. I feel like there would have been a stronger commitment to driving, the new state out as much as possible. That's the feeling I have.
Doran.
But don't you think that if it weren't for the religious fervor, let's say, it would be impossible to justify a war? And when we're talking about, okay, let's keep using your example. What interest does Iraq have to achieve from that, aside from like a Muslim unity or something like that, right? I mean, why send forces in?
I think there's the idea of unity, but like when you look at like the major players, I think in the 3 or 4 big wars that are happening, we're really talking about like Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. And like Iraq will send a battalion, or Saudi Arabia will send a plane, or I think people send a little bit, but I think the 3 major players are the geographic, bordering countries. I think everybody's kind of playing like a part, but yeah, I mean, like that Baghdad Pact happens later, and I think Nasser and a lot of Arabs are really upset about that. Like, it seems like there's even a division fairly early on where, yeah, there's a little bit of a commitment, but not that much. It doesn't feel like there's that big of a commitment.
But Destiny, you must know that it's a widely held opinion in at least in the Muslim Brotherhood circles, or the Muslim Brotherhood adjacent circles, which are very popular in the West nowadays, that the governments and the leaders of the Arab countries are essentially puppets set up by the West from their inception, and that they're extremely unpopular by the common folks, shall we say, who are way more Islamic than them, right? And then that if the people were to really have a democratic free choice, they would elect a Muslim Brotherhood representative to rule over them, as happened in Egypt, for example, with Morsi. Ever since their
I agree
inception.
with that. I think there's the leadership, I think, is a bit more Western friendly than the Arab Street, than the ordinary population is. I do agree with that. But I think it's important to point out that when the Muslim Brotherhood came into power in Egypt, I think one of the first things they did is they wrote a letter to Israeli leadership and said, we have a peace agreement and we're going to follow it. Which is what you would expect a nation state to do, and you might not expect like a religious extremistly driven organization to do. So I feel like it's important to note.
It is, I agree, but I also think that it hasn't been enough time to really know like what would happen. And of course, part of the treaty between Egypt and Israel saw the US, maybe I should say cleverly, bankroll the Egyptian security apparatus to such an extent that makes Egypt basically reliant on its normalization of relations with Israel to keep on the US's good side, because in Egypt, the security apparatus is, and not only in Egypt, but actually in most countries on earth that are not, well, pretty much hellholes, that the security apparatus is turned inwards rather than outwards, right? So towards their own population and to stabilize the government. So
sure.
I would say
good job, US. That's good.
Yeah, I guess
good
it's
job, US. Good imperialism, but
good imperialism. Although I guess many of your streamer friends would differ, but well, maybe not your friends, but we can maybe we can discuss that later.
Yeah, but what I would like to add is that in terms of the land thing, discussion. I would like to think that U.S. conquering land, for example, from Mexico, isn't the same, and discussing it later, isn't the same as discussing between the Palestinians and the Israelis the land that was stolen, quote unquote. Those are different examples. So that's why I would like to add to this discussion the religious intent in it. And moreover, it's this sentence that always people say, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Like, this discussion is purely, in my respects, religious, because why do they want to free us from this land purely, from the river to the sea?
I mean, in my mind, definitely. In my mind, I think that after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, there's this goal or this dream or this fantasy of an Arab-led new unified caliphate, that there will be a new Islamic Arab caliphate that will emerge. And now we got all these people coming in from Europe that are messing with that idea. And I think that's where the frustration comes from. Like I said, I feel like if it would have been Christians, I feel like the conflict would be more or less the same. I think the fact that it was Jewish people, I think there were more humiliating undertones. Nowadays we might think of Israel as this modern militaristic state or whatever, but obviously at the time the feelings were a lot different in terms of the stereotypes and everything that existed of Jewish people. So that definitely added to it in terms of the humiliation and everything else felt by the Muslims, the Arabs there. But I think regardless of who would have been coming in, I think that would have been the feeling. And there's a lot of like intra-Arab conflict going on too, right? The first Jordanian king, I think, in 52 was like assassinated in Jerusalem, right? Or you had, I don't know if it was Muslim Brotherhood affiliated that long ago, murdered a friend of Sadat, like the leader. I think like a journalist got killed when they were on the road to peace with Israel. And then obviously Sadat himself got assassinated later on. And the kings of Jordan were always a little bit more Israeli friendly than the other surrounding countries. So there's like a lot of like weird like intra conflict going on with the Arabs as well. That religious unity is not, I don't think it's anywhere near as strong as they would have wanted it to have been. And I'm not saying you're saying it is, but as people would have wanted it, as some people say it is. I do agree that religion is definitely like a factor. But like I said, I think if it would have been Christians, do you feel that way? Like if it would have been Christians, it probably would have been the same response, basically.
I don't know if it would have been exactly the same. Okay, so in theory, probably yes, but in practice, no, because it wouldn't be so easy, so tempting to try and turn the Western world against it.
Because it's Judean Christian like values?
No, because you try, because if it's Jews, then they're not exactly like the Western people, and then it's easier to try and separate them or something like that.
Okay. Stephen?
Wait, can you explain that a little bit more, or turn them against who? What do you mean by that?
So let's discuss. I'll give an example of specifically what's been happening in the last couple of years. This whole thing of trying to make it seem like the Jews are actually the enemies of Christianity in a sense, right? They're not like us. They're not from us. Like this attempt to isolate the Jews from the Christians of the West. Mostly today it's mostly done on the right, because on the left it's done for different reasons and justifications. This attempt to isolate the Jews wouldn't have been possible if Israel was a Christian country, for example.
Maybe, yeah. It's hard to say.
It is.
It's hard to say. Maybe. I think, yeah. There's a double standard when it comes to a lot of stuff. I'm a very big atheist person. Okay. So I'm not trying to cover too hard for one religion or another, but like, just because of the Western world.
Destiny, you are stuck. We cannot hear you, brother.
You should tell the audience that there was a cut with the internet, and
there was
no shady stuff.
Yeah, there was a cut. We didn't rearrange shit. We're good. Stephen is with us.
I brought up a really good point. They both started screaming.
Hey, don't blame us like that.
They just said they were going to edit out the last hour of the discussion. I don't know what's going on here, guys.
That's filthy by you, Destiny. Sheesh. Yeah. Stephen.
Okay. Sorry, my internet dropped. I'm back. Okay. So as an atheist, I don't try to like carry water too much for any, extremist religious people or whatever. But I will say that in the West, whenever Christians can say some stuff that if like Muslims are saying it, we would be like, wait a second, that feels very strange. So like in the West, Donald Trump is a really great example of this. I don't know how much you guys, if you guys are Israeli, you might like Donald Trump. I don't know.
He's a funny person.
Okay, we'll go with that. But it's very obvious, regardless of what you feel about him, that Donald Trump doesn't care at all about Christianity. Okay, this guy is not a religious man, doesn't know anything.
He said he read the Bible. What are you talking about, Stephen?
Yeah, his favorite book. Yeah, but he'll invoke the Bible sometimes when he talks about like, this is the best book of the world. I've only written the second best book. He'll make all these references to God and everything. But I think if anybody was honestly looking at the United States, like, would you ever say the United States is embarking on a holy war? Probably not. I don't think that that's really the driving thing in the U.S., even though religious leaders sometimes will speak to it a lot. I think George Bush said that he prayed to God before, invading Iraq the second time. And, is it a religious war? I don't think so. But I think it's the thing they say to kind of like, weaponize it to get some of the people hyped or whatever. Now, I think in the Muslim world, especially given, Islam has a greater capacity for the formation of a state in a more official, religiously supported capacity. Like it's definitely different. But I think that, wait, what was this? That I wanted to explain that. And then this is in response to, what was the thing you said right before?
The difference of religions. Like if, for example, this war was with Christians, I think that's why what we discussed.
I said that it's possible to isolate the Jews more easily.
Yeah. It is possible to isolate the Jews. Oh God. I feel like there was something specific I was responding to, and I wanted to make that distinction between Christianity in the West versus Islam, to where we will never say things are like religiously motivated in the West, even though they're using a lot of religious rhetoric. But it feels like for Islam, anytime an Arab state is using any kind of religious rhetoric, people will say that it's fully on, like that's a holy war. They're definitely religiously motivated. But when then I look at the actions on the ground, like you hear this thing over and over again, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Temple Mount, this is the third most holy site in Islam, and that's why it's so important to protect it. And it's like, well, nobody is. Like, I think that if
but
Israel would find a way to,
that's patently false. I mean, when people are carrying out what they call martyr operations. I mean, in Arabic, suicide bombing is literally called a martyr operation, right? So if they literally do that with the promise of paradise, I think your thesis is wrong, because you're saying that the actions on the ground don't match religious motivations, but I think they clearly do, because people are literally killing Jews and willing to die to kill Jews, right?
Yeah, but which people are killing the Jews, though?
Well, whenever there's some sort of terrorist attack, and I don't necessarily even mean Hamas, although you could also point at Hamas, but even people from Judea Samaria or the West Bank, when they do it, like they fully expect to die, and that's what they also post on their social media before they go out and carry on their martyr operation. Right?
Their incentive is to die, basically.
Not necessarily, but they expect to die.
I think that, and I agree that there are definitely, maybe religion can drive that particular behavior more, but it's not all Muslims that are invested in that type of attack in the West Bank. It's in Judea and Samaria. It's Palestinians. It's people that live nearby, right? It's the geographically, close people. So I feel like if it was if it was a martyrdom thing that was the global jihad that Hamas wish it would be, you'd see so much more participation from surrounding Arab states. And I feel like you just don't see that, or surrounding Muslim countries. I feel like you just don't see that as much. So people will pay lip service to it, but at the end of the day, it's just the people nearby that are fighting for, I viewed somewhat territorially, yeah.
But Destiny, you see it exactly from the actors that you would expect to see it from. I mean, who do you not see it from? You do not see it from the Muslim states that are governed by Western-friendly nations, right? States like Egypt, states like Jordan, states like, I guess you might even start to say Syria, although it's too early to tell. But Saudi Arabia and all that, what they have to do is manage their internal PR, oftentimes by using their state-owned media, right? Manage their PR internally to justify not going to war with Israel. That's what they have to do towards their own population. But the areas that are dominated by the explicitly religious and not secular or nationalistic governments, like the Zaydis in Yemen, also known as the Houthis, or the Shia revolutionary regime, explicitly theological regime in the Islamic Republic of Iran, or even Hezbollah, which is also a 12er Shia organization. That's 12er Shia is the same branch that the Iranians are. I mean, these groups that are properly governed by quote unquote proper Muslims, these are exactly the people who act in exactly the way that you would expect from a Muslim, that according to your own definition.
I guess in your mind, how do you see, so we talk about like proper, theocracies. We talk about Hezbollah, we talk about the Ayatollah in Iran. Why do you think they're willing to work with like Hamas? I'm pretty sure Hamas is like a Sunni extremist fundamentalist, sect. And, in the Western world, everybody always likes to look at things and go, oh, look, it's Sunni Shia, Sunni Shia, Sunni Shia.
Yeah.
But I feel like, when you get on the ground over there, it's more like kind of like Gulf states, US friendly against, kind of the more Russian friendly or were Russian friendly states. Like, how do you explain why, I guess like Shia like states would work with a Sunni fundamentalist extremist group like Hamas?
I can try to take that question. In the Sunni branches, you have essentially two large, let's say, philosophical branches. Both of them originate from these earlier thinkers in Egypt who are referenced earlier. So essentially, you have the Muslim Brotherhood type of thinking, and you have the Salafi Islam type of thinking. And in Salafism, also, you have two branches. You have the quietist Salafists, who are like the people of Saudi Arabia, who are Salafists, but they would not interfere with the government. And you have the jihadi Salafists, who are like groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and stuff like that. These groups would try to wage war against, to first unite the caliphate and then free Palestine, right? Whereas the Muslim Brotherhood, their essential creed is to be a bit more pragmatic. They would work with Iran. A Salafi branch would not work with Iran. So you have the Muslim Brotherhood influenced countries or organizations like Hamas, like Qatar, like Turkey, right? These are the main actors. You have the quietist Salafist factions like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, and you have the jihadi Salafist factions like Al-Qaeda, like ISIS, like HTS, which is the organization that is now the government of Syria, but it remains to be seen in what directions they go, right? So we'll keep that quiet for now. So a Muslim Brotherhood branch would work with the Shiites, whereas the 12er Islam branch that currently rules Iran would cooperate also with anyone who helps it, well, basically defeat its main geopolitical rival, which is Israel. But we also have to take into account that aside from in Israel, I mean, in Israel, they worked with whatever they had, which is Hamas, right? But in other countries and places, like in Lebanon, they were backing the other 12er Shia organization, Hezbollah. In Yemen, in Syria, they were backing the Assad regime, which is basically Shiite, but not exactly, right? The Alawites are, there was like this famous fatwa that kind of invented, it's a whole story, but we don't have to get into that. But they were like technically Shiites. And in Yemen, of course, you have the Zaydis, who are also kind of a branch of Shia. Yeah, but they're also not 12er Islam. And they could also be seen as potential rivals in a theological sense. But first of all, I guess Iran would be interested in exporting its revolutionary ideas and crushing its geopolitical rivals. So both the Muslim Brotherhood and the Iranians have been quite pragmatic, let's say, in their theology. But when you see the way that they act and the rivalries that they have formed, you can definitely look at it through a religious lens. And you would see that, right, it doesn't explain 100% of the way that the forces are arranged against each other, but it does explain a fair bit.
Okay. I feel like I understand where you're coming from, but I think the way that I would view it almost was like a religious debate in terms of like the existence of God. I don't know if this is it's called like the cosmological argument. I think it's a syllogism that has to do with the fine-tuning of the universe being evidence of the existence of God. And one of the counter arguments to this thing in like in a metaphorical sense is if you wander across the street and there's a pothole, and there's water filling the pothole, there's going to be a puddle. And when you look at the puddle and you think, well, why is the puddle shaped this way? Well, the puddle's shaped that way because the water is just filling the pothole. So of course it's going to be shaped that way. There's no mystery there. I feel like when I look at I feel like we can make a reason why there might be pragmatism or there might be some religious, rationale for why different groups would work with each other at the end of the day, and that you can make it work. But I feel like ultimately the religious reason will follow the geopolitical one almost every time. Like they will find a way to work together. Like when we have I feel like you described like 50 different sects of Shiite belief. Aren't these supposed to be the guys who believe they can trace the fucking lineage of Muhammad or whatever through their own, don't they even have like stronger claims? I don't know exactly what the religious beliefs are, but the fact that all these people are trying to find reasons and have somehow found a reason to work together to fight what they viewed initially as like the Western transplant nation, I feel like no matter what, they would have found those reasons. I suck at remembering the names for a lot of this, but I know that in the early development of Iran post World War I, there was a bunch of debate amongst their early Islamic scholars about whether or not they could form. They had a name for it for the Iranian for the early Iranian like parliament. There's a specific name for it. I don't remember what they call this, their parliamentary body or whatever. But the even religiously back and forth, there were arguments over, is it religiously acceptable to form, like a democratic parliament or whatever. Or I don't remember if the argument is that like there will be a perfect government when, whenever some Islamic thing happens or whatever, but can you form one in the meantime? And they went back and forth on this. And I feel like when I look at people debate their religion, even in the Islamic world, same with the Christian world, that people always try to find a way to make the religion ultimately fit the goals of whatever the people are. And religious mechanisms to me, they feel more like things that you have to hype your people rather than restraints on your people. That's always the feeling I get. In US politics, I've never heard somebody say, for instance, man, we have all these illegal immigrants here that are draining all of our resources, but Jesus tells us that we have to be nice to our neighbor. So I guess we need to do something, to take care of it. You never hear that. It's always like, we have to take care of our own brothers, get these people out of here. The religion is always weaponized. And I guess when I look at the Middle East, I feel like when Islam is brought out or when they're having their religious conversations, whatever they need to do to justify the expulsion of what they viewed as a colonist state or a transplant state, or just as Europeans coming in, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, eventually the formation of Israel, they would have found a reason to do it. That's the feeling I get. But I guess we're kind of circling the drain on that. So if you want, you can have like the last.
So basically, religion.
Can I ask you one last question?
Yeah. But just so I can understand. So basically, you're saying religion isn't the a priori thing.
it's there's a term legally, sometimes people say pretextual, like people will find a reason to make it work. Like if it would have been Christians, then we would be having the conversation about how, well, of course Muslims are always going to fight Christians and there's always going to be this war against them, and it would have more or less worked out to be about the same, I would feel. Maybe because it was Jewish people, maybe it's like a tad worse, but for the most part I think it would have been pretty similar. I think that's the feeling I had.
Doran.
Yes,
Yeah.
So I just want to say that I think in general we're pretty close to each other in our opinion. It's just that we attribute different, let's say, percentages to the influence of one factor or another. And you've said before
Sure.
that it all comes down to geopolitical factors, right? But I would like to get your opinion on this. Do you think that the early Islamic conquests were geopolitical more than they were religiously motivated?
I'm smart enough to know what I don't know, and I wouldn't venture a huge guess on that. So I'm not 100% sure how I would feel. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer even to the Crusades or anything. Like how much were these religiously driven versus geopolitically driven? If guessing for the little bit I know about the earlier world is, I would say they were probably more religiously driven, but I would say that probably could happen more because it was in the absence of these kind of concepts of nation states that I feel like didn't really strongly emerge until like the 1900s, this concept of a nation of people held together by borders and laws and not necessarily like some religious doctrine. So I would say, yes, they were probably more religiously driven, but also because that was one of the easier ways to kind of have people united together. That'd be my feeling on that.
That's fair. Thank you.
Okay, so from my discussion from my podcast, talking with a lot of scholars and people who are educated, my understanding is that we cannot go to two-state solution because, first of all, if we will take the people from Gaza and from Judah and Samaria, and we will take them as citizens, we will lose the ownership as the sovereigns of this land, as the Jewish people, and the other thing is, they want the all land if that case cannot happen, because if you will not take them as citizens, they will want to eradicate all the Jewish people. So that's why they're saying, like, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So I want to discuss this two-state solution. Do you think that's even plausible? Do you think that really can happen from what we discussed right now?
I definitely think it can, but I think that I don't like the international community's involvement a lot in this region, is because I feel like you would be stupid on either side to accept it. I feel like both sides kind of have reasons to just fight infinitely, and that's why we see the fighting continue forever, because you'd be dumb to go to the table and try to negotiate anything right now.
Doran?
What exactly do you want me to answer?
No, just to clarify about this two-state solution, and how do you see it yourself?
So here's the thing: it's something that a lot of people misunderstand or define kind of weirdly, right? Because sometimes you would see polls coming out of Gaza or Judea and Samaria among the Palestinian Arabs, polls that would ask, "Are you in favor of continued resistance or a two-state solution or a one-state solution?" Right? And so when we say continued resistance, it kind of means throw the Jews into the sea, right, or back to Europe, whatever that means. And when they say one-state solution, it means like some sort of, I don't know, federation or something. But when they say two-state solution, we tend to think that they mean like Israel and Palestine based on something that roughly translates to the 67 borders. But it isn't really exactly what they mean, because if you were to speak to most Palestinians, what you would hear is that you get the 67 borders and you get two states, but you still have the right of return, right? So you still have the right of return into the 48 borders, what's referred to as Israel proper. So in effect, you have one Palestine and one Palestine
2.0.
Al Thani, right? The second.
Yeah.
So it's this is kind of like, I think when we discuss this title of two states, it's something that we can't ignore. So that's what I have to say about that. That it's like this title, this essentially a brand, I guess you could say, that's gotten a lot of PR over the years, but it when you look inside the package, not everyone interprets it the same. Because if you would ask an Israeli, the most common Israelis would think, yeah, you get a Palestine and you get an Israel and you get two states. And, most people would now be against it. But that's how Israelis mostly construe.
And that would add the conflict itself.
Here's the thing, that people now are not so certain that it would.
Oh, really? I'm shocked.
Destiny looks quite shocked as well.
That a two-state solution wouldn't end the conflict.
Yeah, that's what we discussed.
Yeah, there's just like one of the huge things that are at play that are weird for people in the West to understand is kind of the concept of like an ethnic threat, I guess. In the West, for instance, like one of our largest criticisms from a democratic standpoint of Israel is this concept of protecting some ethnicity. It feels like a thing, especially in the New World, it feels like a very wrong thing because we don't necessarily have a strong ethnic foundation. But it's also weird because we don't have a threat to that, I guess. Like if the United States had to make a decision tomorrow where 350 million Chinese people would, move into the United States, we might have a different feeling about that. And it's easy to point to Israel and say, well, they're an ethno state and that's bad, and ignore the fact that there are a lot of surrounding Arab majority states that have actually the ethnic part, I think, built into their founding constitution or documents even, but they don't have the same kind of like threat to their ethnic, makeup. So it's not a thing they have to think about. So I do agree. It's frustrating. In my mind, my feeling from the West is usually the most ignored topic. It has to do with refugees, which I think is a pain point that has been intentionally kind of strategically left open by the Arab world. I don't remember what it was, like Arab resolution, like it was like 1537 or 1357 that said that you're not even allowed to make a Palestinian a citizen of your country. It's why there are so many, up to 6 or 7 million Palestinian refugees that are surrounding Israel-Palestine. And all of those people have the keys, to their great-grandpa or great-great-grandpa's house. And like you said, there's this concept of the right of return, of which a solid figure has never been left on the table by any Arab leader. By Mahmoud Abbas, by Arafat, like nobody's ever said, okay, well, we're okay with 20,000 or 50,000 or 100,000. So that's an issue that's always kept open. Nobody in the West really talks about it. I do agree that when it comes to two states in the West, the only thing we ever talk about are land or borders. But I'm not really convinced that that's the big point of contention. I think it's more, holy sites are pretty important, I think, but the right of return is a huge one that just never really gets talked about. And I agree that that's a big thing that would have to be solved. And that would probably be a big give on the Arab part, where I don't think the Palestinians are ready to say we're going to give up the right of return for 4, 5, 6 million people. I don't think that they would be willing to say that. And then on the Israel side, I think there might be some land and some sovereignty concessions. Like, would they allow an armed Palestinian sovereign state to exist in any capacity with unified borders, without cross, checks everywhere, with some access to, there'd probably have to be some neighborhoods that would go back in East Jerusalem. I don't think the Israelis are willing to give that up, but yeah. So I agree that refugee issue is a big pain point that's not spoken about in the West, that, there's a lot of disagreement on.
So just to clarify, so from what I understand from you, Stephen, you're basically saying there can't be a two-state solution based on those facts that you said right now.
Somebody has to force it. Somebody has to say, you need to figure this out and you have to do it. Because right now, so if you're a Palestinian, you should never agree to anything with Israel, because Israel is genocidal. Israel is an apartheid state. Israel is ethnically cleansing. The entire world is, 50 billion UN resolutions, and everybody says that they're evil. Like, if you just keep waiting, you can always go back to the 67 borders. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter what happens. You just keep waiting. And then eventually somebody's going to come and that's going to get figured out. Right. So if you're a Palestinian, why would you ever make a deal? It's stupid. Just wait, because there's always a better deal down the road. You never have to pay a political consequence for it, even if you're paying huge material consequences for it, which I would say the Palestinians are, at least definitely in Gaza. But even to some extent throughout the West Bank, you're paying material consequences for it. And then on the other side, if you're Israeli, well, why would you ever make any kind of final settlement when you can kind of keep growing your settlements in what the international community calls the occupied territories, whatever, through Judea and Samaria? You're expanding your settlements. You're getting more and more people moving out there. and the Palestinians themselves don't have their shit together enough to really negotiate anything. So why would you make any deal? If you were to go out and make a deal, all you're doing is cutting off any potential future growth, which I feel like Israel doesn't really want to do. So I feel like both sides have this like incentive to just fight forever. And I think it's a really bad incentive that is felt by the international community sometimes. Yeah.
So definitely, I feel like there's not much ground to explore here because I think we broadly agree. I would just...
You agree on expanding on the settlers that we want willingly to do, no matter what?
That's not what he said.
So clarify, please, Stephen.
That the settlers say that. What do you mean by that? Or
no, what you said about the settlers. That's what I meant. Because I
think that Israel enjoys the further expansion and more people moving into the West Bank. Like I think when Oslo 1 was done, I want to say there's like 100,000 settlers, and I think now you guys are up to like 700,000. And I feel like there's two different types of settlers. I feel like you have this might be offensive, but I call them the fucking crazy people, which are like
it's called in Hebrew.
Shiloh. They're the ones that like live out there that are
like in a caravan on the top of the hill.
Maybe, yeah. And then you have like, I feel like the majority of the settlers in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria are like, it's like cheap housing and they're all near the Green Line, which I don't even think the Palestinians care about. Like if you were to renegotiate, you do land swaps or whatever, the majority of them can be kind of like, fine, that land could go to Israel, just give us other concessions or whatever.
Yes,
but
can I try to put some context into these broad terms, right?
Sure.
There's about, you're right, there's about 700,000, I think, at least. But almost all of them, like 80 to 90%, are in what you call the
Green Line.
Yeah. So you have like the Gush Etzion, Modi'in Elit, Ma'ale Adumim, places like Ariel. Places like East Jerusalem has like 200,000 Jews, and they're counted also as settlers, right, into that 700,000 figure. So if you're really looking into it, you see that there's about 80 to 90% of the Jews living in Judea and Samaria. The 67 lines are essentially living in the what's called the large settlement blocks. And these blocks have never even been on the table. I mean, even if you go back to the Clinton parameters or the thing with Olmert and, all these deals, these places were never on the table. So I don't, this is not necessarily a blank defense of all settlements, right? Because there are settlements that are illegal, even according to Israel. But you have 80 to 90% of the people living in these huge population blocks who are very close to the green lines and that have actually not been Arab cities before. Let's just put it like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's largely fair to say. But how dumb of Israel, knowing that it's this contested territory, to continue to have more and more people. Like the problem is it feels so much more intractable. And then the settlements that are deeper in, they do grow and the outposts do happen and these expand. I wish I remember the name. I think it was the name of the report is of a woman, but there was an investigation under the Sharon government. And I think Ariel Sharon was a huge proponent of we should just completely leave both of these places. When the withdrawal happened in 2005 from the Gaza Strip, there were a few settlements that were taken out of the West Bank, and I think he wanted everything out of the West Bank. But there was still expansion that was going on, and I think like your Bet Salems and people on the left like to blame Sharon, and they funded all these crazy outposts and settlers. But I think what the report ended up finding was, despite from the top government forces and Sharon and people saying like we're not doing this, like these people that were moving into these like deeper settlements were finding ways to funnel money from the government and to take money from other areas, and they were getting help from other people that were like, yeah, we're going to do this or whatever. But it wasn't like a government driven thing. So it feels like that problem is getting more and more intractable, and what's the off ramp, like, because it feels like both. Like on the Israeli side, I just don't see, it doesn't look like a good faith effort, right? The Palestinians will say, through Oslo 1 into the Second Intifada into now, well, look, the Jewish people, they're not a partner for peace. And I think Israelis can rightfully point back and it's like, Arafat never told you guys to stop blowing each other up and killing us. And, you guys aren't doing anything to make the situation even any better. And I think there's some validity there. But Israel I think Israel has the capacity to force a peace on the region, but it's just, I view Israel as a relatively opportunistic country where if it sees that it can take more, it will keep kind of moving in that direction. That's the feeling I have. Yeah. I feel like the West Bank is a great example of that. Yeah.
Two points that I would like to bring up here. The first one is that you literally brought up of course, the counter example of what happens when you evict settlements in 2005, right? You get essentially, when you leave an area, there is no real interest to keep the army there. And once you live with the army, then you get basically a hostile state right next to you, as you know, a la Gaza. But in addition, I would say that the settlers, you know, growing the settlements or anything like that, you would say it's opportunistic, or, you know, it could be viewed as opportunistic. I agree. But really, it's just, it could also be viewed as natural growth with a relatively small fraction of insanos, let's say, right? That get a lot of bad press and you know, maybe justifiably. But, you know, I wouldn't say that insisting on holding the settlements is if we look at the history of Israel's decisions, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a bad security take. And when you also say that Israel, you know, could enforce peace on the region, I don't think that's true, because you're assuming that if the Arab Palestinians were to get exactly everything that Israel and the West seems to think that they want, then there would be peace. But I contest that that's not true, because what the general consensus thinks that they want is not really what they want. Right? We've spoken about what the two-state solution means to most people and what it means to the Palestinians. Right.
Sure.
And there's a reason.
Even the two-state solution, as given there, pulled unfavorably between both people. Like, technically, nobody wanted the two-state solution. Even everybody in the West gives it as like that thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but in Israel, at least there was a point in which it was very popular, right? There were a few points until they literally blew up in our faces.
Yeah, literally. With the buses and all that, with the intifadas.
And also, you could say that there was another kind of a pilot in 2005 disengagement plan, and that blew up in our faces even worse, right?
Yeah.
So
Gaza.
Yeah.
Hamas.
Thank you for the context. So I would say that when you say that Israel could enforce a peace, I mean, it could enforce a peace in the same way that it enforced the 2005 disengagement. But, you know, you enforce a peace for a couple of years and then you would have a whole new other problem to deal with. So it seems to me that, you know, I'm not saying that I have the solution. I'm just being a good philosopher and pointing out the problems in yours.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but it's one of those things to where, like, there has to be, for peace in this region, it feels like there needs to be a grand overture of somebody doing what feels impossible. And things feel impossible until they're not, right? Like, I think Sadat going and speaking to the Knesset I think was a big moment. And, you know, it feels to me like Egypt is like the country. This is almost like your Russia of the Middle East, you know, to lead the new Arab world, and for Egypt to be the country that makes peace first with Egypt. That would have never been my guess. That was just it took a huge commitment, not just from Sadat or from Begin, but also from Jimmy Carter in the United States. There were a lot of people that came together on that. But one of the things that happens, I think, when somebody forces a peace is they rob a lot of like moral authority from the other side when they do that. And it feels like on both sides, there's just so much opportunity to keep fighting and because there's so much that both sides continue to fight because they think there's more that they can get out of it in the future. And if they make a final peace arrangement, then they know, okay, well, this is what we have. And now there's no more expansion. To center this, I guess, on the most recent conflict, like, I always thought this was funny. I think that I'm going to be honest, over the past several months, I don't know how many more times that Netanyahu felt like he needed to invade the Gaza Strip. I don't know what was going on for 2 years. It just had to keep happening over and over and over again. But I mean, I'll also say on the other side, man, if Hamas would have released all the hostages a year in, Personally, I think domestic support in Israel for the war in Gaza would have been much harder to sustain, because with no more hostages there, you're losing a lot of this kind of like moral authority that Netanyahu was trading on. Because I think the hostages were always secondary, regardless of what anybody says. Like the primary thing was kind of like getting rid of Hamas and moving them out of there. Now, how far of a second priority were there, is up for debate, I guess. But if Hamas would have released them all like a year in, well, fuck, now that war is a lot harder to justify. But Hamas kept them because they enjoy the fighting and they want the civilian death and they want the international community to save them. So, yeah, I know that there might not be popular support at a given time for a thing, but I think if a country comes to the table and they're like, here's the agreement, this is what we're going to fucking do. And, I think it's fair. Some negotiators said it's fair, and everybody's going to come together and enforce this. Not only the US, but also the Arab states are going to come together with more than just a fucking letter. And we're going to enforce this. I think eventually the region would follow, the Israelis and the Palestinians would follow. That's my feeling.
I just want to add one more thing to this discussion yet about the settlers. I personally don't agree with the claim of Stephen when you say that we want necessarily to expand maybe the territories, or rather our control. I mean, I see it in Smotrich and maybe Ben Gvir's beliefs, maybe. Yeah, exactly. But the mandate, I think the one will agree with me probably, is that we want peace no matter what. So if there was a case for a two-state solution, we would probably take it if there was a rational side on the other end with maybe Western values. We can say that, and we will have proper peace and they would live in prosperity, and we don't give a fuck, to be honest.
And you could just have Jews live in their country and nobody would care, right?
Yes, exactly.
But I would actually like to come back to what Destiny started his discussion with, because I don't want to get distracted. You had kind of 2 points there. The first point was you spoke about the overtures, like what Sadat did. I think it was a pretty good example to back your claim. And again, with the hypothetical of Hamas maybe releasing the hostages and kind of robbing some of the legitimacy of the war, some of it, not all of it. So what I would say to that is that there's a difference in the stakes that are involved, right? I mean, Sadat taking the risk with Israel, you're not putting the entirety of Egypt and its population in danger of essentially genocide, right? Whereas with Israel, it could very much spell just that. I mean, imagine a unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank, the same as was done from Gaza. And you have basically Gaza on steroids within like 15 years. And I don't think that I think even you wouldn't say that there's an extremely low probability of that happening, right? So that the stakes are just not the same. But I do think you brought up a fair point, but I think that for that reason, the comparison is somewhat lacking. And then
you're saying, actually, real quick on that point, I actually feel I agree with you in the short term, but I feel the opposite in the long term. I feel like in the long term, I feel like the scary thing is eventually the kind of like the Western-backed Arab leaders won't be able to hold their population back anymore if the Palestinian-Israeli conflict continues to be protracted, and that continuing to kind of kick the can down the road is what's going to lead to this huge uprising. Whereas if there was some agreement in place, like I think we can all agree, again, regardless of even what the Arab citizens feel, most people are like, Saudi Arabians are happy to be in Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, people in Qatar and the UAE, and even in Egypt, like these are relatively happy people that probably don't want to see the whole Middle East devolve into like a crazy holy geographic war or whatever. Like I think most people are fairly happy. And the idea that they would be so keen to look for a fight, I think that they would police their own a bit more if they saw like the Palestinians starting to get wild after an agreement had been made, is the feeling that I have. Whereas right now, if it keeps getting, kicked down the road over and over and over again, who's to say that the next October 7th or the next terrorist attack or whatever, wouldn't involve some kind of uprising from surrounding Arabs or from all the Arabs even living in Israel.
Yeah. So 2 points on that. The first is when you talk about some sort of external policing, I think we have some historical precedents with the UN peacekeeping force in Sinai before the Six-Day War, right, before 67, and also with what happened in Lebanon, right, what's called UNIFIL. That's been not exactly a tremendous success. And I hope that
when I say external, I meant from the real quick, just from the Arab states. Fuck the UN. I don't think the UN is going to do anything.
Yeah. I think that it's too early for me to draw historical parallels, but maybe if we can have this talk again in 10 years, then we can look at Gaza and see how that pilot went, right? So something like that. So I don't have any precedents to keep discussing this, but I think that you've made a reference to another point that I think we would somewhat disagree on and we could explore some ground in, and that is it was hinted at in between the lines of what you said, that you believe, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, I might have said it before, but that you think that the Abraham Accords were kind of a mistake to leave the Palestinians out or something like that. Do I have your opinion on that about right?
Yeah, I would say a huge mistake. Yeah, I think they were just bad. Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit?
So I feel like in the history of Israel, you have all these surrounding Arab states that they feel very unified. It feels like nothing is ever going to get done. Under Begin, Shlomo Ben-Ami called this capsule theory. I don't know if there's ever like an official term that the government used, but it was this concept that Israel could extract singular Arab states for peace and try to move things in a piecemeal manner rather than trying to make peace with the entire Arab world, and that might be an easier thing to do, especially with the help of the United States. So Egypt was extricated, and then after the fall of the Soviet Union, you get Jordan, and then as U.S. kind of like interest in the region grows and Soviet interest kind of recedes, all of like these kind of Gulf states, like everybody, there's like this kind of like U.S. friendly axis of power and stuff south of Syria, Iraq, Iran that kind of grows, that everybody's like pretty happy with, I think. But I think that once that had been accomplished and Israel wasn't staring down the barrel of, 10 different Arab states coming for its, neck, I think that there should have been, okay, we this worked, we did this. Now we need to figure out what we do, with our Palestinian stuff, because this is still completely open and blown wide open on the table. We haven't done anything with it. But it feels like to continue that approach of trying to extricate singular or a few nations at a time into some peace agreement, like when the Palestinian one is the huge one, like why? It feels very opportunistic. And like, what are we trying to do here? And my understanding is the impetus even for that agreement starting was to delay more annexation of like Area C stuff in the West Bank anyway. And yeah, that just seems like very like obvious the direction that's headed in. That's how I feel.
So there's really a lot that I could say to that. I'll start with the simplest objection. So okay. You've spoken about when Israel was no longer stirring down the barrel of different Arab states aiming their guns at it. So, in fact, it's true that that coalition, that classic historical coalition of, the Pan-Arabist coalition of Syria, Egypt, kind of fell apart with the Egyptian and Israeli peace agreement. But it's not true that Israel was not staring down the barrel. Israel was staring down the barrel of an increasingly nuclear Iran. It was staring down the barrel of hundreds of thousands of rockets from Hezbollah aimed at Israeli population centers and strategic facilities. And was staring down the barrel of the Shia militias in Syria and in Iraq, mainly in Iraq. It was staring down the barrel of a blockade to the Red Sea and to Israeli shipping through the Suez Canal, which is a giant deal. And Israel basically started a 6-day war over it, right? I'm talking about the Houthis, of course. And it's still staring down the barrel of Turkish you might even say imperialism today. So I wouldn't say it's true that the early threats have abated, but there are significant new threats that were definitely aiming the so-called barrel at the Israelis, and Israel was by no means not vulnerable, as we have sadly discovered on October 7th. And I think maybe you might have explored this idea before, but it could have ended way worse for Israel if Hezbollah were to join, or if the Iraqi Shia militias were to join. And this is essentially kind of what could have happened, but didn't. And so that's the first thing that I have. And I also have some more points, but I've spoken for quite a while. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
So I think that's actually one of the biggest disagreement points. Do you know Elon
Levy?
He was a spokesman for
Elon Levy?
Yeah. I think for like 6 days he was you're like a spokesman, and then stuff happened.
Yeah.
I remember arguing with him a lot about this. I don't know if this is a common talking point in Israel still, like the 7 fronts that you guys face. Is that said a lot? The 7 fronts. He would say this all the time.
I don't know. I'm not a spokesperson, so I don't. I
Sure,
wouldn't
yeah.
say 7 fronts, but it's. You could see it as also one front that's coming from one theater of war in a sense. But it's
Sure.
still. It was still facing an existential threat. That's my main point. It doesn't matter how many fronts there are.
Yeah, I understand. So one of the biggest disagreements that I have with modern Israelis is I feel like I hear a lot of trauma, especially kind of from, especially for people that lived through the Second Intifada. And then a lot of it I feel is inherited, but I think is lacking increasingly more justification. I think one of the biggest, in my feelings, one of the biggest kind of mistakes that a lot of like far-right neo-Nazi anti-Semitic people make is this concept that Jews have such a great propaganda machine, or they do Hasbara so well, or they control the Western media. And I feel like more what happened is, we say Gen X and the baby boomers, that in the older generations, Israel, for whatever you think about it, is an inspiring story. Country shows up, ragtag group of people want to go, make some land in a place that, despite being God's holy land, is kind of shitty land. There's not much to do. They got to cultivate it. There's a whole bunch of stuff they got to bring in water from the north. There's a whole bunch of work that has to go to making Israel inhabitable. And they do all this, and then they fight these wars largely on their own for the first like 2 or 3 of them, up through at least 67, if not really 73, is when the U.S. is like really a big backer. That Israel has to do all this work to finally get support from the West. And the story is genuinely an inspiring story. It looks like a Western democracy, Western style democracy for, and at least initially, people that look like us and everything. Like, okay, cool. That story held, and it was sold, not even sold. It just naturally plays out as a good story. And it's like a natural, point that the Western world, the first world, aligns on against the second world, against the Soviets, everything else. After the fall of the Iron Curtain, after the Soviet Union goes away, after Israel is successful in making peace with parts of the Arab world, I think that Israel carries with it this concept that they're still kind of like stuck in this world of existential threats constantly, but nobody in the West from the younger generations sees it anymore. For people that are maybe, 45, 50 years older, they still see Israel as kind of this underdog that fought its way to survival. But for people my age and younger, when they think of Israel in the West, it's just like, oh, those are the people that bomb Palestinians all the time. And that's it. And I think that I think there's more truth to that than that Israel is facing a constant existential threat. But regardless of where the truth is, I think Israel, it behooves Israel to understand that as much as Israel might say, oh my God, we're fighting 7 fronts, or we're fighting all the existential threat. In the early days of the Yom Kippur War, I think it was Moshe Dayan.
True.
Because Golda Meir, I think, was still there for 73, right?
Yep.
It
was Moshe Dayan who said it was the fall of the Third Temple.
Yeah, the Third Temple has fallen. Yeah, we have to start fucking nuking motherfuckers, okay? Because this shit is over. To go from that to Netanyahu is, I don't even want to say the luckiest man in the world. To go from that to Nasrallah is dead, Ishmael Haniyeh, every single Hamas leader is dead, no matter where they are, whether they're in Syria, whether they're in Qatar. Every single apparently device with a fucking battery in it in southern Lebanon is exploding, in Hezbollah hands. The Houthis are getting bombed by fucking everybody to basically knock down every single enemy in the region, right?
But that's after a successful war. You skipped the first year, which is kind of important, right?
Sure, I know, but I'm just saying that Israel basically beat up like everybody, whether it was like for Iran to get bombed. Like, it's hard to look at that and go, wow, Israel is this underdog that's getting, super screwed up in the Middle East, and they might be destroyed at any time, especially when, for the first time, I think it's meaningful, when Iran was going to bomb and did attempt to bomb it, and did, I think in 1 or 2 areas, a couple of missiles fell, bomb Israel. You get other states, like Jordan, intercepting missiles and helping. That feeling to me isn't like, and maybe it's easier for me to say in the West, but that's not like the existential dread feeling I don't think Israel can sell that to the rest of the world anymore. Something has to change there because it doesn't look like it's a fair fight, right? It looks like Israel kind of beat the shit out of everybody.
So I'm not trying. I'm not going to try to
Mm-hmm.
sell anything to the rest of the world. I'm going to try to sell it to you, right?
Sure.
You know, so here's the thing. We know both what strategic depth means, and when you have, it's true that once proper war broke up, I guess you could say, broke out, Israel kind of dominated it, especially since the successful moves against Hezbollah, right? That's kind of what tipped the balance of the war, I guess you could say. And then it, of course, allowed the war with Iran and etc. But if you were to really think about that, the strategy could be, if I were an anti-Israeli Arab, the strategy would not be to go to a long and serious war. The strategy would be to surprise attack Israel and basically get to the centers of power, essentially, to the maybe military bases or to the Air Force bases and take them out. And it's really not that difficult. You could be there within hours, especially, I guess the only reason that it didn't happen was that Hamas was so afraid of penetration by the Israeli intelligence that it did not share or coordinate with its friends. Imagine if they were all to attack together. It's not really that outlandish to say that despite of all of Israel's later successes in the war, you could just, get a bunch of terrorists into the Knesset and into the police stations and into the air bases and, pull out of there whoever that you need to pull out by his hair, maybe lynch him a little bit, but although you don't have to really. And the state as a kind of organized entity kind of collapses, right? Or, so in that sense, I do think that it's fair to say that there was an existential threat, and I also think it's kind of obvious that there was. So
may I add something? Yeah, for the army, for like 8 hours was not even activated. We can say that whatever was it, the Air Force or whatever it was, and there were policemen who were in the Nova, where it was the party itself, and people who are commanders who are coming from their homes and not in duty and trying to save us. And
and I should also add, Destiny, that if you read Mohammed Deif's declaration, Mohammed Deif is the the head of the military wing of Hamas in Gaza,
who was killed.
Right?
Yeah,
it was.
So when you read his statement on the outbreak of Tufan al-Aqsa, right, the operation, 7th of October, it's basically a call for all of the surrounding affiliated factions, let's say, to join in, because now is the chance. And that's what they were probably aiming for. I mean, that's what they were hoping for, right? And it's not something that could not have happened. So I just wanted to put that on the table when you talk about, minimizing a threat and saying how strong Israel is. I agree with you. And I'm actually, of course, quite pleased with that. And that's a great achievement by the Israeli intelligence and army. But at the same time, it could have ended way differently. And when you have a country as small as Israel, then really a surprise attack could be all that it takes. So that's just what I wanted to say about that.
So I do agree, and I think it's a great credit to the Palestinians, the Arabs that live in Israel and in the West Bank, that when the attacks happened, I think that it feels like there was this hope from Hamas that not only would Hezbollah invade, there'd be like this massive third intifada, this uprising, because there's like 2 million Arab Palestinians that live in Israel proper that could have been a part of whatever, some third intifada, and it didn't happen. And I think that's a credit, and I think it shows an improvement in the region of kind of like where people's minds are. I think that the thing that you have to be careful of when you speak like this, like Israel is a small nation, it could be taken over by terrorist threats at any point, is that feels like it can be an infinite justification for infinite conflict. Like we can never make peace with these people because if they militarize and come kill us, like it's all over. Like that, that just feels like an infinite justification for always having a protracted conflict.
Well,
like what is the off ramp, I guess? So like, what do you see then as being like?
I don't know. Well, I just see a problem, but you're right that it's a problem, that it's a justification for an endless conflict, but it also you know, it is what it is in a sense, right? So I don't know. I mean, you say, you know, I don't have really a lot of what to respond to that, because it was kind of like an idealistic argument and not like a realistic one. I mean, your argument was basically, I don't like it.
Well, the realistic argument, I think, is that I would say that right now on its current path, I think Israel is on a path to its own destruction, and it will come in the course of thinking arrogantly that it can forever forego figuring out a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that will at some point boil over into a massive, that if the situation was a bit different in the surrounding states, that the next attack might find more harmony with surrounding Arabs that does lead into a huge attack. And then it's like, you know, now everything is completely over. Whereas if somehow there was a solution between Palestinians and Israelis that, you know, involved some kind of two-state thing, or whatever the final agreement is, the whole region looks significantly different. And now like Iran's biggest fear, the biggest threat to, you know, people like Iran are a united Israel, a united everybody to the south, all the Gulf states, everything. Because now they're like, they have no entry point at all into anything. And, you know, so much of the Arab world's grievances against Israel would kind of, you know, vanish if that problem got solved. But just keeping that open forever, it's just like it's like a huge hole in the bottom of a boat that water's like always coming in on. And at some point, like, if it doesn't get solved and it goes on forever, I think that that's only bad for Israel. I don't think that ever magically gets better. The only magic that will happen is Israel blowing up. That's what I feel.
But that kind of assumes that a potential settlement would lead to peace, which is not what history teaches us. I would say regarding.
Well, I mean,
even
if I assume it's 50-50, which we can say that, I think that like the status quo, I would feel is like a 95% Israel's going to get blown up. Whereas like, even if you have to flip a coin on peace, like at least there's some chance of some larger arrangement there that, you know, opens the world for everybody to kind of exist in some way. Yeah.
Okay. So there were 2 points that were opened here, or 2 directions. And I would like to ask Moshe what he would like us to dive into, right?
Okay.
So there were 2 points of disagreements between us that we could explore. The first was that a path basically that going around the Palestinians to the Arab nations was a mistake, right? We've covered this before, but we didn't really address it in any length. Sure. And the other one,
I would just say, I think just on that real quick, I think it was good in the beginning, but the Palestinian issue has to be dealt with eventually. I wouldn't say it was a mistake in the beginning. So, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So maybe we do not disagree as much as we might think. Is it okay if I try to push you a bit on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Right. So basically, the idea was that the Israelis would go around, right, and sort things regionally before they solve them locally or something like that. But and there's a fair point to saying that, you know, the core of the issue is the local issue, because essentially the Israel-Arab conflict is the Jewish presence in Palestine, like from the beginning, right? That's the conflict. So these two couldn't really be disconnected. And you could even say, if you were pro-Palestinian, which I think in a sense you are. I mean, you're not pro-Palestinian in the Hamas terms, but you wish the best for everyone. And there are some other people who we could put in that boat, people you might know, like Ahmed Fouad al-Khatib, right? So, in a sense, because of Palestinian rejectionism and because of how emboldened they've been by this myth of refugeehood that's been rampant in the Arab world and turned into a sort of, you know, something that's you can't shake it off, because no one will give it up now, because it's so ingrained in the culture, not just of Palestinians but in the entire region. You could even make the case that by going around and basically normalizing and establishing ties with the Arab countries first, you in a way improve the odds of the Palestinians to getting better lives, because you're basically getting the Arab countries into the equation, and these countries, after having normalized ties with Israel, could negotiate also to get some concessions for the Palestinians. Now, who is this bad for? It's bad for the maximalist position, right? It's bad for the from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free sort of folks. But I think in general terms, in what we would call moderate terms, you could even say that this was actually good for the Palestinians in a sense. It might turn out to be. And as for the why go around, because essentially there's been many years of being stuck in the same place, with Oslo and the disengagement and the things in between with Barak and Olmert. So I wouldn't say that I would say that the Abraham Accords could very well be a significant step in a long historic process that would eventually might lead to some de-radicalized Palestinian autonomy. I don't know if it's possible, but if it is possible, it looks like that's the way. What do you think about that?
So I agree with you in theory, but the thing never happened is the issue. It's like, I'm going to get shredded at the gym. I'm going to buy protein. I'm going to get running shoes. I'm going to get workout clothes. I'm going to get a gym membership and do everything, but then never go to the gym. And it's like, okay, well, you're not going to get ripped that way. You're just getting all the stuff. I think that there's
but what if your shirt could tell you to get ripped? Saudi Arabia is not an inanimate object.
I agree, but Saudi Arabia is not going to go to the Palestinians and tell them to give up their cause, right? That's not going to happen. That has to
they
be...
might.
They can build maybe another UAE on that place. Something along those lines. That's
a whole other thing.
I think Saudi Arabia is about as friendly as you can be, I think, to the United States and Israeli interests without completely being like part of the country. I think the issue is just that I agree that Israel's created conditions that would allow it to force like a big peaceful arrangement between Israelis and Palestinians, but they're not doing that. I think again, I think it's a pain point that they prefer to keep open, to just kind of push the issue further down the road to continue to, I would just say, expand settlements in the West Bank and indefinitely put off having a strong Palestinian state in its presence. Like, I agree with you that you can argue the conditions have been made that might even lead to a more favorable position, long-term peace between both sides, but nobody is like pushing for that to happen. It's just like being kept open is the feeling I have.
Yeah, but you could also say that the loss of leverage on the Palestinian side could weaken the maximalist factions. I mean, you've said yourself before, and I agree with you, that the Palestinians really have no reason to stop with the maximalist position. But if the Israel normalizes with the Arab world, and if the Iranian axis is severely beaten and weakened, then that could spell the possibility for something new and exciting. So for that reason, I think that you characterizing Israel going around the Palestinians to the Arab states as some sort of mistake, I really think, I mean, it could turn out to be a mistake. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I know the future, but I think that given what we know, I think it's really hard to claim that.
Hey, just a second, Stephen, before you answer, that's the last talking point about this subject, because we want to go to other subjects as well. So respond, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I were to hear that as a Palestinian, then in my mind, we have to do as much terrorism as possible because, the situation is getting increasingly desperate as more and more people are being extricated from the conflict. You got to consider, right, that the Palestinians of the 20th century were a people that were fighting alongside their Arab brothers that were telling them, from Cairo to Damascus to, the capital of Jordan. I fucked up. Amman. That's it. Yeah, I was saying Alan. Amman. But that all of their strong Arab brothers and everybody in the region was helping them fight this war, and they, we're going to get vengeance for the Nakba. We're going to come back, and we're going to, screw them up and figure everything out. And one by one, you're watching your allies evaporate and be replaced with the most worthless people ever. Like, well, how did I go from Egypt to fucking Iran? And how did I go from Syria to Hezbollah, and how did it go from Jordan to fucking Ansar Allah? What the fuck? Like, all of your allies now are gone. The only people who are helping you are the most extremist, crazy people in the universe, and the situation is getting increasingly desperate. And I don't know where that ever ends. We're like, okay, we are truly indeed like in a really dire state. Let's come together and make like a reasonable peace agreement. I don't know if that ever happens. It hasn't happened yet.
Just finish.
Yeah.
You want me to wrap up?
Yeah, you wrap it up because
So we have so much more to explore. But what I would say,
you can
really,
final word on that. We go to the next one.
Really, what I would say is that this is. I mean, what you've described is almost by definition de-escalation, right? So
October 7th doesn't feel like that feels like the most extreme attack.
True,
ever.
but they've true, but they've had allies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which they were hoping to achieve something with these allies, and they were disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when you don't have allies? I mean, you've stated yourself earlier that part of what perpetuates the conflict is the involvement of the world, like of the international community. And I totally agree with you on that. But I think you don't put enough emphasis on, and I know that this is a subject that you're well acquainted with, the role of the Arab countries in basically creating the refugee problem. Right, you've acknowledged it, I think, before. And once you have the nations that created the problem, in a sense, because really the Palestine issue could have been a non-issue if the other Arab countries would have accepted defeat in 48. Right, there would be probably really no conflict in any meaningful way, because the refugees would just get citizenship elsewhere, and you wouldn't have this refugee cult going around.
Sure, I half agree. I mean, they did in 48, right? Like technically, Jordan did annex the West Bank formally, and they did give citizenship to all of those Palestinians.
Yeah, but they kept
a lot of who are living in Jordan.
But they kept this whole perspective of justice and it's not a coincidence that when you read even diplomatic statements by Arab countries today referring to the conflict, you would you could look it up. It's even in the Saudi foreign ministry's announcements. You would always see the word just peace or just resolution, and really what the just
in
is
compliance with international.
Exactly, and that's really a dog whistle. The just thing is really just a dog whistle for right of return, of course. And
it's the resolution for
that's the justice part, and the international is, of course, the settlements are illegal. Although we could discuss this at length, but I think that Moshe wants us to.
And we need to go and finish with the Palestinian and Israeli conflict, so we can go to the U.S. and Israel thingy. So just to ask you both, and I'll start with Stephen. Just to keep it short as well, who do you think is the bigger obstacle to peace then, Israel or Palestine, from that, the Palestinian people rather, from all this conversation we had?
Okay, as quick as I can. I would say that on paper, when it comes to like the actions of a person, I think that the Palestinians have never left a solid peace deal on the table for Israel to accept, because the right of return is always kept open, vague discussion on holy sites. So I would say, like, in that sense, the Palestinians have been an obstacle in that they've never really had a strong negotiating partner for the Israelis to look to. But I would say in terms of like moral responsibility or size, I would say that Israel has the ability to force peace on that region. If at one point you got another Barak, another Rabin that was like, we're going to fucking figure this shit, another Sharon, we're going to figure this shit out, it would happen. That Israel could force that in a way that everybody would eventually
force
be
that?
okay
Do
with.
you mean unilaterally, like in 2005?
Yes. Basically, that Israel could say, this is...
Yeah. We took people from their own places, their own homes, and we see what happened.
Yeah, but it was a half measure. That was the issue, right? Because they didn't leave for the West Bank. They only left the Gaza Strip.
Well, that was an experiment, so that's what happened, Do
you think the results would have been different if Israel left both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? It would have been somehow better?
I think so. I think significantly so. Sharon thought so. I think it would have been different, for sure. I would say maybe it would have been better, probably would have been better, because there'd be so much less moral authority than on the side of the Arab, on the side of the Palestinians to fight.
No,
hey, listen,
I disagree. I'm sorry. Go on. I'm sorry.
No, yeah, I understand. But I feel like if Israel wanted to force some peaceful thing almost unilaterally, or at the very least, they could go to the table unilaterally and say, this is what we're going to do, like figure this shit out. And then there would be significant pressure from the surrounding Arab states on the Palestinians to be like, hey, like, don't fuck up again, like, accept something. And there'd be real pressure, not kind of the lip service that's paid. So I think there's a shared responsibility. I think on paper, the Palestinians have just never left a solid deal on the table. But the state of Israel is so mighty and powerful that if they wanted to really force some peaceful arrangement, they would. But they're happy to kind of like watch the conflict carry out and continue on because they keep getting more stuff as a result of that. Yeah, that's my feeling.
Doran, if you can respond.
So I kind of agree with some of what he said, but I think I kind of fell apart at the end there with the look. I think, Destiny, that you're underestimating the strength of the right of return culture in Palestinian society. I think a forced solution in the 67 lines could very, very well have led to an attempt and a revival, in a sense, to finally liberate Holy Palestine.
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I feel like if that would have been the case, if the sentiment for that would have been there, then October 7th would have involved everybody in the Palestinian world rising up, and it didn't. Regardless of regardless of the feelings of the PA,
the army operates in the West Bank, and it arrests people affiliated with terrorism and with Hamas. And that's not to say that there's entirely zero Hamas in Judea and Samaria, but you can't reach the same level of operational organization because the Israeli army is present, because there's Israeli population present.
I mean, the Israeli army was present throughout all of Israel for the Second Intifada, right? But I mean, there were tons of attacks in Israel proper, tons of bus explosions and everything else.
Yeah, but it's not the same. It's not the same kind of advanced and coordinated operation that we've seen on the 7th of October.
I agree with that. Yeah, I'm just saying that if the propensity for, or if the appetite for violence was that deep or pervasive in the Palestinian world, like I feel like there's a path forward, but it would require a big move on the part of one side. I wish it would come from the Palestinian side, because it seems like it has to come, when it comes to Israel and Palestine, it has to come from the Israeli side. But I mean, I guess my question is, like, it sounds like like you said earlier, I was being idealistic, but I feel like I'm being more realistic, because my counter to you, and I'm curious what you would say, is I feel like you're being idealistic and assuming that this could stay open forever, because I feel like, was it Rabin, I think, who said, I wish that Gaza would just break off and drift into the sea, because it's like, fuck, like this is never going to be solved. Like, in your mind, like, what is the end to this conflict? Because when I talk to both sides, it's funny because you say this thing, and Palestinians say the same thing to me, because when I'm arguing with them, I sound like a crazy Zionist. And then when I argue with you guys, some people say, oh, you're a left-wing cuck. It feels like both sides are like, I agree with, I know, but both sides are like, I agree with everything you say, Destiny. You were so right when you were talking about my side, but when you're talking about the other side, you were completely wrong in everything. And it feels like both sides are like, yeah, this situation will eventually solve itself. And I just don't ever see that happening. How do you see it ending, I guess? Yeah.
So wait, there's actually 3 questions here. Do you want me to respond to the accusation of bias, or to how I see it resolved, or to, I don't even remember what the third thing was.
Not even, when I say bias, I just mean like, okay, so here's a statement and then the question. So in 48, no matter which side would have won, I get it. I would get it. I say, okay, sure. If and it sucks, post Holocaust, post Balfour Declaration and guarantees, if all the Jews would have been wiped out, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. It sucks, but man,
we tried and we failed.
It would have been over, right?
Yeah, and if the Jews would have, taken all of the mandatory Palestinian area and kicked out every single Arab, I mean, especially at that time, nobody talks about it, but Turkey, did all of this, 100 times over. Yeah. And nobody gives a fuck. And if Israel did, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get it.
And the Czech Republic. I mean, post and Russia.
Yeah. Begin brought this up when he was talking to Carter. Like, I know how you guys did. Yeah. So I would have gotten that too, right? I can understand. I get the justifications of both sides, but now we're here at this point. And my question is both sides have all the moral justification they can find in history. And arguably they could, maybe, sure. But where does it end? Like, how do you see it ending, even if you feel like you have some moral justification to continue? Like, how do you see this ever finalizing, like, in your mind? What's like the pathway to that?
Right. So it might be a lame answer, but I don't really see a path. I think ideally what we could do is always take the next step that seems best, and hope that over a long stretch of time, by improving the situation gradually, we could reach some sort of resolution.
By education more or what?
Not necessarily. I mean, maybe...
Or talking to the moderate people in the Palestinian guys?
I mean, look, if... I guess it comes back to what I've said before, right? About how by having the normalization treaties and expanding the Abraham Accords, you also, in a weird sense, also increase the leverage of certain voices in Palestinian society, right? So, you know, if it's the obvious best move, then you should take it. And if it's obviously not a great move, then you should avoid it. And hopefully down the line that would lead to a better world. And I think there's a lot to be said also philosophically about that when you have this sort of end goal vision, the sort of utopian vision style of even National Socialism and communism, these are ideologies that had a very clear end goal in sight, and maybe you just can't plan that far because you're missing a lot of dangerous and very deadly stuff along the way, and maybe you should just focus on making things a bit better at a time. So I don't really have a solution for you for a resolution because it's too far away now. I can't see it. But what I can see is that obviously you should do more of a good thing. Then you should obviously normalize. You should obviously not let Islamic extremists on your borders, and you should definitely not do any move that's based on some ideal hope that it will solve everything when you have a lot of evidence that it really won't.
So wrap it up, Stephen, as well, so we can go to the other subject.
I think I like the idea of kind of like some people call this great man theory, but sometimes there are important people in history, important ideas. I think sometimes there's stuff. Like, I feel like the start of the United States, I feel like that was a pretty stupid, crazy idea. The idea that you would make a democracy, you vote for people, no kings. I feel like when you look at the start of Israel, I feel like on paper, everything about this was basically the dumbest idea imaginable. The first two aliyahs failed miserably.
Right.
You're going to a place, I think initially Herzl didn't even want people to speak Hebrew. Like, that seemed like a stupid idea. The first two waves of people that went to the Levant, they just left afterwards because it sucked. The land was like atrocious. There's not enough water. It's hostile, everything. Like, all of these reasons for why it's a bad idea could be there. But like, there was an idea, there was a cohesive, understanding of what the plan was. And in a relatively impossible way, like, something emerged that ended up working because of the commitment to those ideals. And there are a whole bunch of reasons why it should have never worked, right? Especially, the project is already, like, in my opinion, like, if I was, in the 1800s, I would say, what a stupid idea. And then if you were to tell me, well, 50 years later, half your population is going to be deleted as well, it's okay, well, obviously this is the dumbest idea imaginable. But it still ends up working because of a really strong commitment to that ideal.
But it takes two to tango, right?
Sometimes it does, but okay. So I'm sorry. Final question related to this, and then we'll move on. You can just speak on this, and I don't have to.
Okay, Stephen. Yeah.
Why? I feel like there is a moderate partner in Israel, and everybody hates these people. And they're called the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinians hate them because they see them as an Israeli security subcontractor. Israel hates them because of the Martyr Fund, and they think that they're...
You're talking about the PLO, sorry for...
the PLO that turned into the PA.
Kind of the PLO, is it?
Fatah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So...
With Muhammad Abbas, or whatever his name is.
Abbas, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mahmoud Abbas, yeah. How do you view... Because one of the big criticisms I have with this, whatever peace plan, I don't know, whatever, the 20-point thing that was just proposed, is it seems like Netanyahu's found a way to kind of like finagle and redo the Palestinian Authority as well. I feel like if Israel was ever going to have somebody to go to for negotiations, there would be some unified Palestinian government. And I feel like Israel's always taking steps to try to undermine that as much as possible. So right now it's with, go. Yeah,
just to add one thing, with Mahmoud Abbas, his whole doctorate in the Soviet Union was against the case of the Jews in the Holocaust. And he said like the numbers were wrong or something along those lines, try to delegitimize us basically in our own existence. So that's what I'm saying. So he may be moderate in your eyes, but in our eyes, as far as I see it, I would like to hear what Doran says. I don't see him as a moderate guy, as well as in the Palestinian population, but may Doran add as well to it.
I don't...
I mean, moderate compared to Arafat.
Oh,
right, yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah. Look, I don't I don't know if I really have that much to say about it, aside from how unpopular and illegitimate the PA seems on the surface of it. But I can talk about a poll that really recently came out of Gaza, interestingly, not in the West Bank, in which they preferred to be governed quite overwhelmingly by the PA. That doesn't mean that me as an Israeli I would want the PA in Gaza. It could be quite risky, but I don't want to get into that. What I do want to get into is that, of course, Abu Mazen is quite old. He won't be around probably for much longer. Just this past couple of weeks, they have finally elected, it wasn't an election, but they appointed a vice president to the Palestinian Authority. And the guy that they chose, I can't recall his name, but he's a guy who's basically the one who's in charge of security coordination with Israel. So that might change the direction of where things are going, because you've basically put as your heir apparent, in a sense, a person whose entire life and job for the last many years was to coordinate security with Israel. And now when we have I think that this move was probably done somehow with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, and and the whole thing with the move with all of the Arab states in the region. So that might change where things are going, but of course it's too early to tell. As far as I can tell, the PA is not seen as legitimate neither by the Palestinians or by the Israelis don't need to view it as legitimate, but they don't see it as a partner, certainly.
His name is Hussein Sheikh, by the way.
Did you just
I fact checked this.
Thank you.
So if you don't have something to add, Stephen, we can go to the Israel. Okay, so the problem that I see, and I think Doran as well, and I think you as well, Stephen, on social media, I don't know if you see it as a problem rather, but like America is this thing that they want to be America first, and I understand that. And there is this whole movement that goes against mainly Ben Shapiro and all that train of thought that Ben Shapiro tries to suck up to the Israel because he puts Israel first and not the US first. So how do you look about all this, let's just say, this thingy that the Israel has the connection to the US? And what do you think about the narrative that social media creates about that narrative?
I think Israel is really good at advocating for itself. I think that I think historically, because Jews have kind of held on to their culture across different countries, and just because of kind of the weird place that Jews were kind of pushed to in society, being kept out of certain jobs and then gravitating towards others, it kind of gave the Jewish people the ability to exist. For instance, the fact that what is it, usury or whatever, lending at an interest was illegal, allowed Jews to participate in financial sectors more, allowed them to be more educated. And then because that's always been a really important cultural value, it's allowed them to communicate their ideas across the world in some ways more beneficially than not. Sometimes people can become victims of their success, and sometimes you can become successful as a result of your trials and tribulations. Arguably, the Jewish people's lack of any kind of coherent state for 1800 years or whatever, for 2000 years, might have been beneficial because something has to keep you together, right? The only thing that would survive at the end of that is something with some kind of coherent, strong, unifying idea. So the existence of AIPAC in the United States, the fact that you have a decently wide base of people to draw from that are also decently wealthy and really want to advocate for their interests, that is a real thing. It happens in the US. I think that neo-Nazis and far-right people, and I think Israeli people overestimate sometimes the impact they can have on US thought. Like I said, my personal belief is I just think that the story of Israel, people didn't give enough credit for just how good the story was. And that's why so many people in the US, especially during the Cold War, were kind of captivated by that and fell into it. Or I say fell into it, but I mean, thought it was a good story and something worth supporting. And today, with that story not existing anymore, and now as you're getting in this weird populist right-wing era of especially in the United States, this weird isolationist stuff, it's going to be very hard, I think, for Israel to find a lot of support from the United States, maybe as people start to get older and older. I don't know how long this weird isolationist populist ban is going to happen, but Israel is going to have to do some serious like work reforming its, kind of appearance to the West, because, like to an average American, if you ask them, like, why are we so friendly with Israel? Like, that's a hard question for a lot of people to answer. And, like, do we really feel like Israel needs our help militarily? Regardless of how you might feel there is an existential threat or anything, in the West, it just looks like Israel just beat the shit out of every single country around it and nobody did anything about it. And that's the feeling that exists. And Israel is going to have to take an attentional approach to change that if they want to, in terms of remaining close to the West. And I think.
So just so I can understand and then give it to Doran, you're basically saying, that's what I understand between the lines, we're basically lobbying, or maybe lobbied great, and we have great, powerful people in the US, and that's why we influence it. But our story isn't as mainstream or try to be controlled, or rather try to be said to the Western world and to the US. That's what I understood. Is that right?
As time has gone on, the story is not as one-sided anymore.
I'll try to rephrase it, Destiny, if that's okay, and you tell me if I got it about right, because I thought it was very smartly done by you, actually. So what you're saying is that the story of Israel is actually a pretty good, an amazing story. Well, you didn't use the word amazing, but it's a pretty good story of a bunch of ragtag Jews come up with a crazy idea and then come and against all odds, kind of make it out there. But over time, as the generations have changed, Israel is strong, and now the story appears completely different, right? And that's how. So I thought that's a very sharp observation, and I'd like to commend you for it. I haven't thought of it this way. I would like to add just a couple of more points that I think make the Israel-U.S. alliance kind of unique. I mean, there are many U.S. interests in the region and in Israel, of course, and you probably know them quite well. But I would like to bring up some interests and unique characteristics that are not brought up as often. So the first one is that Israel is an effective ally because it acts. It doesn't wait for the U.S. to do things for it, right? If you look at maybe, I don't know, I guess you could say Japan or South Korea or Australia, or I don't know what. These countries, it's not certain they would act to save themselves, in a sense, right? They would count on Big Brother to show up and do the work for them. And I think Israel has shown that it's effective and that it takes care of business, and that the Israeli proactiveness kind of invites further U.S. leaning into it, because Israel shows that it's a competent force. And as much as I hate to use the word, Israel, of course, takes care of its own interests, but by applying force and by being a country that acts even without U.S. direct supervision and without direct U.S. involvement, that kind of makes it more useful, right? Because you have a dog that doesn't just bark, it also bites. I mean, I hate comparing us to a dog here in this analogy, but I think that I had to do it for the point to land. So that's number one. Number two is probably something that I think is quite unique in Israel. I might be mistaken on that, but the U.S. is very popular in Israel. Even though many people advocate for reducing dependency on the United States, which is funnily enough something that all of the anti-Israel people on the both right and left won't bring up. But many people in Israel think that there's too much dependence on U.S. aid, and that it needs to be changed in the next couple of years. And actually, I think Netanyahu even came out and said something along these lines. So this is... what I'm saying is that the United States is extremely popular in Israel, and that Israeli activities that directly benefit the United States are seen quite positively here, both on the right and on the left. So that's something that I think is quite unique to the alliance of the US and Israel. I don't know if there's another US ally in which the US is so popular and beloved. I could, I could do the whole shtick of Judeo-Christian traditions, but I don't guess you're the guy to do that whole song and dance too, right? So
and also may I add the geopolitical power it has against like Russia and Iran and all that opposition.
Yeah, but that's not unique, right? You have other U.S. allies that have geopolitical values.
Yes, but we are the Amer and the what it's called, the Mizrach Tichon, like in the Middle East. Yeah,
I guess you could say that. But of course, I agree with that. But I was, trying to say the things that were unique about Israel, because the U.S. could also use other allies elsewhere, right? It has Japan, which is a power in the Pacific. It has, it has South Korea. Yeah, whatever, you get it. So that's what I had to say. I've been going for quite some time.
So responding, Stephen, also let's wrap it up so we can go to another discussion. I'm sorry for that.
We're taking too long.
No, it's okay. Like if we had more time, it would be great. But like today we had 5 hours. So yeah.
I understand. I understand what you're saying, but like, in the 60s, there's domino theory and the whole world could fall to communism and we might lose access to the entire Gulf if we don't have a place there. And these are immediately felt arguments that every American, especially in the Cold War, after the Cuban Missile Crisis and everything else, like we're like 100% tuned into this. And, to say, well, Israel is important because they can represent interests in the area, can take aggressive actions against other enemies. It's like I understand what you're saying, and I think in a very intellectualized, geopolitical, geostrategic sense, I can be like, okay, I understand that. Well, I mean, I do. I think Israel's a good partner. I'd rather be partnered with Israel than Iran. But I think selling that idea to the average American is much, much, much harder, especially when we're on our big isolationist spend. And then I would also say I will take issue a little bit with the idea that Israel, will bite on its own, like as opposed to like Japan or whatever. It's like, okay, well, fighting China is very fucking scary. Fighting Hezbollah is also kind of scary, but significantly less so. I think Russia and China are big, scary enemies. And at the end of the day, when, the Iranian nuclear reactors are buried really deep underground, the U.S. does have to come in there and take care of that, because the heavy, arms needed to get down there is really, really hard to do, unless you have your B-52s or whatever.
Well, did the Saudis bite?
I'm going to be totally honest with you. When I did my whole Middle East history studying, I'm not entirely sure what Saudi Arabia does in terms of military. I don't know if they have anything at all.
They don't bite. Oh, they have quite a strong. So they have quite a strong military. They have one of the largest GDP per capita spent on military.
Yeah, I know you're saying that. I hear that. I just don't know what they do ever. I feel like in the 6-Day War, I read that they or not the 6-Day War, prior to this, when there was all the fighting in Yemen, like 3 cargo planes took off and they just flew to Cairo and they just stayed with Egypt for. I have no idea what's.
No, it's okay. I don't know any of the Gulf states. We don't need to know everything. We're good. We're just stuck in civilly.
I'm saying it half facetiously, and that I agree. I feel like I don't know if Saudi Arabia went to war with anybody. Well, they went to war with Yemen and they couldn't even get rid of the Houthis after.
Yeah, look. I wasn't trying to get to. I wasn't trying to make fun of you. I was just trying to say that you have examples of U.S. allies in the region who don't bite, right? So
yeah. No, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying I don't feel like the Saudis could do anything.
And I think that thing you said about convincing the average American with the old isolationist streak that's going on right now, I think that was a fair and good point. So kudos to that.
So let's switch to the last discussion or last topic that I want to talk about is we in Israel, I think, give large emphasis, especially like our generation, to the streamers. I think you are, Destiny, one of those big guys who did those great things. I think you have a big voice, and I think they are influencing the consciousness of other people in the world, in Israel. So you talked about or rather you talked about the neo-Nazis proclaimed guys, or the right-winged ultra guys. That you insinuated or talked about that, and I want to bring somebody up who can be insinuated to that club, which is Nick Fuentes. And I want you maybe to give us your thought about how he views like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or what do you think about him rather? Because he goes against, and those are his main accusations that I'm reading, that there are war crimes that Israel does, blocking humanitarian aid, violating the Geneva Conventions, the planned annexation that Israel does.
Yeah, but that's not even the big claim, right?
Yeah,
the big claim is that the influential Jews are running America's foreign affairs.
all those people with the big noses. Yeah. So what do you think about that, Stephen? What do you think about Nick?
I don't. My takes on Nick go back and forth. I felt like he. I mean, we're all men here, and I would never say this when I was younger. Okay, but as a young man, you're far more militant. You're far more extremist, and nothing in my mind. A young man doesn't want to hear anything less than being told that because he's young, he's more radical or whatever. But I feel like Nick definitely started off as like an insane neo-Nazi, and I feel like as he's grown, especially as he got more politically effective, I think he tried to moderate his audience a bit, but then there's this rapper called Kanye West, and he's fucking crazy. And Nick saw the opportunity to run off with him, and he did this whole "I love Hitler" thing, and that was weird. I feel like as Nick comes back, I don't consume as much of his content, but I feel like it's more of kind of the standard-ish, like isolationist bend. I like to be careful with the way that I define political groups in the United States. I'm a very strong center left person. We have this group of people like socialists or tankies that I think are different. I think that those people have a scarier view, I would say, on Israel. Like in my mind, when you get like these very far right isolationist types that might even be crazy anti-Semitic, like the big anti-Semitic complaints are going to be that Jews are in control of America, and maybe at their worst, we have to get every Jew out of the United States. But I feel like the very far left, like the socialist commie types, especially the ones that are kind of weirdly beholden sometimes to, I won't say the Arab world, but they have this concept of imperialism in the West, and they're with everybody who's against that, right? Because I won't say the Arab world because they hate the Saudis, right? But they love anybody that's like represents anti-American imperialism. Like those people wouldn't just say we need to cast all the Jews out of America. They would say we need like violent regime change in Israel. They would take it a step further. They would go way further. Whereas like I think that your neo-Nazi types in the US, if we were to, I don't think a neo-Nazi type in the US would ever say we need to go blow up Israel and get rid of them. They would just say, I don't want anything to do with the Jews and make them stop controlling everything in my country or whatever. But like the very, very far left crazy people would be like, we need to go to Israel and we need to take that land back and give it back to the oppressed people, which I think is kind of crazy. But both of these are still relatively fringe ideas, just because in general, all of the older people in the US, kind of like Israel on the left and right. So it's that stuff doesn't bubble up as much. It does on social media, but not really in the elected political world.
Not yet, at least. But Doran, if you can answer, if you can answer to what do you think about Fuentes?
What I think about
I want to, but a short one, sure.
So no, I would just first of all like to say that Destiny's take on the tankies and socialists was quite insightful. Thank you for that, for how they would treat Israel differently than the classic right-wing anti-Semitic folks. About
a short answer, not a long one.
I don't really have a lot to say, I
mean, a beautiful hair, if you want to say that. Yeah.
Okay. Nick, you have a very nice hair that's coming from a Jew without hair. So, yeah.
So let's talk about another person who was like very popular in Israel. I know like there's the difference between like political commentators, which like their main shtick is being political, and there is those guys who were like influencers, who were like being afterwards a political commentators, we can say that. And I will bring Sneako to this conversation because a lot of people watch Sneako in Israel, and Israel, Sneako says a lot of the times like Israel did 9/11. He claims that Israel is a Jewish ethno-state that controls the US government and that Palestine needs to be freed from it. So what do you think about the stance of Sneako?
Oh, and that the US is a Jewish occupied nation also. I think I've heard it say it with my own ears.
I forgot. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. We say Zog for Zionist occupied government.
Yeah. Zog. Right. Thank you.
I don't know if it's always been like this. I'm 36 years old. I feel like it wasn't like this growing up as much, but I feel like nowadays everybody kind of has to have like very strong political beliefs on everything, even if they're totally uninformed on it. Just because of kind of how Sneako came up through like this kind of like red pill manosphere arena, that area of discourse is prone to a lot of weird conspiratorial stuff. And for whatever reason, Jews are just a very good scapegoat for every conspiracy you could ever possibly have. So he kind of like bites onto that. And then there was also this weird bend in that world to like go to Mecca and be, I guess, a Muslim, even if you're like a gambler and you have like, a women OnlyFans girls like Andrew Tate or whatever. I don't know. I think all of this cringe and dumb. I think Sneako's views are problematic, but I don't think there's any depth to them. Like, I don't think this guy's ever opened a Quran in his life. So I just don't think about it that much. Yeah.
Doran, if you want to add something.
It's bad. It's bad. Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah,
so I'll add another one. I think is the most popular. Maybe I'm wrong. Asmongold. No, not Hasan, not your friend. Yeah, yeah. We'll talk about him as well. But like, just to keep it short about Asman, he is critical of the religious theocracies. Asman argues that any culture of government based on religion, Islam or Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, is inferior because of its restricted individual freedom and identity. And he basically says about Palestine, he says that the Palestinians and other Middle Eastern societies are barbaric or inferior because of their religious and conservative.
Yeah, but he took that back.
Huh?
But he took that back.
So add to that point if you want to.
I don't really have anything to add. He said it, and then he apologized.
He apologized?
Yeah, and he said that he was mistaken.
I understand. So okay, so I'll ask you, Stephen. What do you think about Asmongold's views in general?
I mean, I hate them. I think he's a hardcore MAGA Trump sellout, and I hate Trump more than anything else in the universe. So generally, the only path that I can see to me becoming a neo-Nazi is how much Israelis love Trump, and it drives me crazy. It's the number one thing that makes me want to take up arms against my Israeli friends with my Hamas brothers and fight against Israel is how much Israelis love Trump. So yeah, I hate Trump. I think he's horrible for a variety of reasons, and Asmongold loves Trump. Yeah.
There was a viral video that Doran maybe saw of a woman who screamed like, because Trump came to Israel, she said, I want to suck Donald Trump's cock. And she said it like, and it was super viral in Israel. Like, how can you say that? And she had like her baby near her or something along those lines. You did not see it?
No, but maybe I'm not around the same space as you are. I guess.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I don't know what website you saw that on.
I understand. I'm sorry. Well, let's talk about your best friend, I think, Hasan. Yeah. His views on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Destiny, how you see those views?
Similar to Sneako to some extent. They're very ill-developed. It's just like a luxury belief. In the West, without getting too deep into it, not in the West, I should say, in the United States of America, we have this weird game being played where we have these socialists or communists that are in the United States, but they're only here for social media. They don't actually care about like political power at all. So the only thing they do is they attack the political left, the center left or Democrats, while going after no political power of their own because they can't get anybody elected because their shit is crazy and they don't care about anything, but they dominate our social media and everything else. So what happens is I get into some of these arguments where people online or people in politics even sometimes are like, oh, well, there's an issue with the far left and there's an issue with the far right. And like the far left are people like Hasan or people on social media. These people that's it. They're on social media. And the far right, I would say this is your majority of both houses in Congress. Like MAGA is I would say far right movement, and they control everything in the United States right now. And there's this huge asymmetry. But yeah, I think that people like Hasan do a great damage to all the public discourse. I hate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become this like single line dividing issue in so much of the United States and across Europe. And the people that have the strongest opinions about it literally know fuck all about it. Like there was that joke people were doing like from the river to the sea. Like, do you even know what river or sea anybody's even talking about?
Yeah.
It's just so annoying to me to see how divisive the issue has become to a bunch of people that don't know anything about it or care anything about it. And it's just, it's really dumb. I hate it. And I hate the contributions to it. Yeah.
Do you think Myron is also on the same boat, Myron Gaines? You had debates with him as well.
Myron is, definitely part of that red pill space that Sneako came from. I would say he's very much on the weird, like, anti-Jew or thinks that like Jews control everything, that train of like conspiratorial stuff. Yeah. We've argued a lot about that. Yeah.
And just to add up, because I see a lot of influencers, and again, even the small, like those who are not political per se, like Adin Ross, for example, and him saying free Palestine. I think that, and maybe Doran can attest to that or add to that, I think that it harms because they're saying it just to say it, just to virtue signal, I think.
Yeah, and that's true, and I think it's harmful. But again, I think that I think that Israel needs to understand, because I think that the far right neo-Nazi people and I think Israel both dramatically overestimated why Jews were popular in the West and had way more to do with the story than with any propaganda. I think part of it was intentional via the Soviet Union, training countries how to speak the language of propaganda. Palestinians speak the language of the West so well. And Israelis are mute. They cannot communicate their ideas to the West. The most effective piece of propaganda that was made for Israel in the current conflict came from Hamas, and it was the video of that woman in the back of the truck. That was a Hamas video. They're so good at, when something gets bombed, picking up a headless baby, shaking in front of a camera, and making content out of this. They're really, really good at it. And meanwhile, you guys put together, this 47-minute video footage that hasn't been released to the public of all the crazy shit that happened.
That was crazy, man.
That was crazy. Released. It's just shown to members of the Knesset. If you go there in your media, you can, get access and watch the video. But it's like, the fuck, yeah. So that it's a problem, regardless of how you feel in the conflict. Yeah, Palestinians and their movement is fluent in the language of the West, and Israel cannot communicate their ideas very well. And that's why you get, I think, as a virtue signal, like, not to sound mean, but like, who's going to say like, yeah, like Israel against the Palestinians? Like, well, that doesn't feel very good, as opposed to free Palestine, like the Palestinian underdogs, fight. It's easier to sell intuitively immediately to somebody. 100%. Yeah.
And let's give one last name, I think, and then we'll go to the last question that we will ask is Shapiro. How do you look about the views of Ben?
I hate every conservative that defends Trump. And I hate Shapiro because Shapiro is okay with all the crazy unhinged Trump says. I would argue people like Shapiro can foster a lot of anti-Semitic tropes, because the only time he cares about conservatives being hateful, or like there was a huge group chat leak recently from a bunch of kind of like staffers and stuff on the conservative side, and they were being anti-Semitic. And now Shapiro's like, well, this isn't good, guys. We can't let anti-Semitism rise on our side. It's like, well, what the fuck did you expect to happen? You guys are crazy about every other topic. Why do you think they would draw a line around just this one? So yeah, I think Ben Shapiro sold himself out way too much in terms of carrying water for Trump. So he loses a lot of the moral authority he would have otherwise to fight against things like anti-Semitism.
So one last question, and I think, Stephen, you're a great reason this conversation came to life, because I gave you other names and all of that, and you said to me something along those lines. That's how I interpreted it, that a lot of people are trying to ensure their own beliefs on you without trying to really understand, or trying to come to some conclusion without trying to score, like per se a debate. And we had a discussion here, and I think it was healthy, and it was great with Doran, and thank you, Doran, for coming as well, to having this tango dance with us. And what I want to ask is, do you think that the role of social media and the incentive of money and the incentive of, those, we are saying it on X, taking those clips randomly and out of context and just sharing lies maybe, and also like being that radical, gives much incentive to not the truth, instead of trying to discuss really the truth and trying to serve and build a better world? How do you look at it before we go to Doran?
Yeah, I think I have a really hard time communicating this idea to audiences because nobody wants to feel this way. But if you look at from a scientific perspective, I guess, from an evolutionary perspective, the way that you are here today is that your genetic material was able to make copies of itself and propagate itself through time and space. The whole orientation of you as an organism is the propagation of your genetic material. People take this, they have this they have this telos of humankind, this idea that man is a rational, reasonable, truth-seeking machine. Yeah. And that is absolutely not true. That is a thing that you have to practice to think reasonably and to think logically. Your brain is not automatically oriented towards that. Your brain is oriented towards making kids. That's all you really have to do. And if you think 20,000 years ago, if you and two friends are standing in the jungle and a bush shakes, and your two friends say, there's probably a dangerous animal behind there, I'm going to fucking run by. And you go, I'm going to go and investigate. And you go and investigate, and there's a lion there and you get fucking eaten. You're not rewarded for your curiosity. So I try to tell people all the time, like, your brain is not automatically geared towards seeking truth. And anytime you're sitting in front of a passive media feed that's giving you information that you're not intentionally seeking out, you're not informing yourself. You're being spoken to by an algorithm that's just trying to monetize your attention. Yeah. And the assumption that your attention is going to automatically be geared towards truth seeking is an incredibly stupid and naive assumption. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Passive consumers. Doran, you can add to this conversation.
I think these were pretty good points that you've made. I would like to add that, look, you said that basically what your mind is geared towards is having kids, right, and propagating your DNA. But I think there could be more to it than that, because as we're seeing in the West in recent years, and you could be hijacked by ideas that would even negate that, right? I mean, you got negative growth in almost all Western countries, and you have you know, you could have the idea of being an aspiring martyr without having kids, or so you could have. I mean, there is some truth to that material view that you've described, but I think we need to pay attention to the ideas that grip our society as well. And of course, the ideas that Western societies hold should not be taken lightly, should be guarded. And well, we see the result of what happens when these ideas are not the norm and not dominant, and the groups that you've discussed before, like the socialist tankies and the neo-Nazis and whoever the hell, all these guys are a danger to that, I would say. So, yeah, that's. But on the other hand, of course, there's also a problem with the birth rates and all that. But maybe that's a thing for another time. But ideas should be taken into account.
Yeah, I'm sorry, not to mislead. I 100 million trillion % agree with you. I'm not necessarily saying that like we're here to make babies and that's the most important thing. That was more to push back. That's what we were designed, our bodies were for. But I'm not necessarily saying what we were designed for, but I'm saying we absolutely were not designed for seeking truth. That's like a very cognitive, intellectual, past our, you know, animal basic instincts. We can
modern problem. We can say that because we attach meaning to things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And things can hijack, like ideas and stuff are very important to be paid attention to. I would say oftentimes more important than just money, like ideologies and stuff can drive people in surprising ways. I think a big part of political problems in the West, in the United States especially, was people kept analyzing everything as though billionaires and moneyed interests were controlling everything. And especially now, as we've watched the United States fucking tank its own economy for literally no fucking reason. It's like there's other things at play here than just money, you know, and people have to understand that. Yeah, ideology is very important.
So first of all, I want to thank you both for this discussion. First of all, Steven, thank you for coming to the show. And I hope we will have more discussions like that. You're great, and you're great with what you're doing as well. So thank you. And also, Doran, thank you very much for coming to the show as well and having this discussion.
Thanks for having me.
So yeah, thanks for having me too.
So let's end it here. I was Moshe Fabrikant. That was Doran Shafrir and Stephen Bonnell as well, known as Destiny on the web. Check their channels down below. Thank you very much and have a great day.